Human Rights Day in South Africa isn't all sunshine and rainbows as it's painted to be. Let's pull back the curtain on this day, shall we? This day, which South Africans observe every 21st of March, is ironically a commemoration of one of the darkest events in the country's history, the Sharpeville Massacre. On that fateful day in 1960, thousands of peaceful protesters gathered in Sharpeville, a township in the Vaal Triangle region of Gauteng. They were there to protest the draconian pass laws of the apartheid regime. These laws, for those not in the know, were nothing short of a slap in the face of human dignity. But instead of being heard, the protesters were met with a hail of bullets. 69 people were killed and close to 200 were wounded. Most of the victims were shot in the back while they were running away. Just let that sink in. The very day that's now celebrated as Human Rights Day was marked by an egregious violation of the most fundamental human rights. Now, isn't there a touch of irony there? A day meant to celebrate human rights is rooted in a day of bloodshed and horror. But as they say, history is written by the victors. Today, the Sharpeville Massacre is often glossed over, and the focus is on the post-1994 era when South Africa started celebrating Human Rights Day. The narrative has been switched. The tables have been turned, and the truth has been, well, somewhat sugar-coated. But the reality is that Human Rights Day in South Africa is a reminder of a brutal past. A past that the country is still grappling with, a past that still casts a long shadow over its present. So, the next time you celebrate Human Rights Day, remember its bloody history. It's not just a holiday, it's a day of remembrance, a day of reflection, and a day to recommit ourselves to the fight for justice and human rights. Because the struggle is far from over. While we remember the victims of Sharpeville, let's not forget the unnamed victims who go unnoticed. Yes, in the shadowy corners of South Africa's past, countless individuals faced the cruel hand of apartheid. Not all were part of grand incidents like Sharpeville, yet their suffering was just as real, just as profound. Imagine the untold stories of men, women and children who bore the brunt of a system that sought to erase their identity, their dignity, their voices silenced, their dreams shattered, their lives often cut abruptly short. Each one of them was a person, a soul, not merely a statistic in a grim tally of injustice. These forgotten victims remind us that the struggle for human rights was not just about headline-grabbing events or iconic figures. It was about ordinary people, facing extraordinary adversity, each contributing to the collective fight for justice. The struggle for human rights was a collective effort, marred by countless unnamed victims. Did you know that there were numerous atrocities covered up during the apartheid era? Now, we're talking about some of the most horrific cover-ups during apartheid, the underbelly of one of the darkest periods in human history. Imagine a system so brutal, so inhumane, that it would do anything to maintain its status quo. That's apartheid for you. The South African government of the time was so hell-bent on preserving their power that they would go to great lengths to keep their crimes hidden from the world. There were countless instances of forced disappearances, secret assassinations, and indiscriminate bombings that were swept under the rug. The infamous death squads were notorious for their role in these cover-ups. People simply vanished, leaving their families in despair and confusion. Justice may be blind, but in South Africa it was also mute and deaf. In the aftermath of apartheid, South Africa was left with a bitter pill to swallow. The architects of the oppressive regime that had violated human rights with impunity were never brought to justice. The shocking lack of accountability sent ripples through the fledgling democracy, fostering a culture of impunity that still lingers today. In the name of reconciliation, many perpetrators who had committed heinous acts of violence, discrimination, and degradation walked free. They were neither held accountable nor made to pay for their crimes. This was a bitter pill for the victims and their families to swallow, a stark reminder that justice is often elusive, and sometimes, sadly, non-existent. The absence of justice created an environment where the oppressors could continue their lives without facing the consequences of their actions. This was a glaring failure in the pursuit of justice and equality. The scales of justice were heavily tipped in favor of the oppressors. Apartheid may be over, but its legacy still haunts South Africa. While the shackles of the oppressive regime were cast off over 3 decades ago, the specter of that era continues to linger. Today, South Africa faces a new battle, a struggle against the insidious forces of inequality and discrimination. It's a battle that's waged in the townships, where poverty persists and opportunities remain scarce. It's a battle that's fought in the classrooms, where the quality of education is often determined by the color of a child's skin. It's a battle that's played out in boardrooms, where the glass ceiling remains stubbornly intact for many. The fight for human rights, it seems, is far from over in South Africa. The nation's journey towards true equality is a long and arduous one, marred by the scars of its past. But it's a journey that the people of South Africa are committed to, steadfast in their resolve to create a fairer, more inclusive society. The ghost of apartheid still casts long shadows over the Rainbow Nation. Ever heard of Robert Sobukwe? No? You're not alone. Robert Sobukwe, the enigmatic Pan-Africanist, is one of the many unsung heroes of South Africa's human rights struggle. While figures like Nelson Mandela have taken center stage in our collective memory, Sobukwe's name and countless others have been relegated to the footnotes of history. Let's consider Zondeni Veronica Sobukwe, known as the Mother of Azania. A nurse by profession, she was a tireless advocate for the rights of her people, enduring the hardship of her husband's imprisonment while raising their children alone. Then there's Steve Biko, a student leader who became a beacon of hope for the Black consciousness movement. His untimely death in police custody shook the nation and the world, but his legacy of resistance lives on. These are just a few of the forgotten heroes of South Africa's human rights struggle. The struggle for human rights had many heroes, not all of them are remembered. They deserve our recognition and respect. The end of apartheid was supposed to usher in a new era of equality. It didn't. The sweet promises of the post-apartheid era of prosperity and fairness have, in many ways, been left in the dust. While the shackles of racial segregation were rightly discarded, an alarming number of South Africans find themselves chained by poverty and discrimination. The Rainbow Nation was meant to be a beacon of unity, but the stark reality is that the wealth gap has widened, and many South Africans are still struggling to access basic services. The promises of equal opportunity and economic freedom have been betrayed, leaving behind a bitter aftertaste of unfulfilled expectations. Even more disheartening is the persistent racial discrimination that continues to plague the nation. The dream of a South Africa where every citizen, regardless of their color, would enjoy equal rights and opportunities seems more like a mirage than a reachable destination. The dream of a just and equal South Africa remains elusive. The struggle for human rights in South Africa has been commercialized and exploited. The legacy of this struggle, born from countless sacrifices, has been repurposed as a tool for commercial and political gain. It's been used to sell products, to promote politicians, to shape narratives, and to amass wealth. This misuse has often overshadowed the real issues, the ongoing fight for equality and justice. In the hands of the powerful and the opportunistic, the legacy of human rights struggle is no more than a marketing strategy, a catchy slogan to attract attention. It's a stage prop in the theater of politics, yielding applause but rarely resulting in tangible change. This exploitation of a nation's painful past is not just disrespectful, but it also dilutes the importance of the ongoing struggle. It distracts us from the real fight that is yet to be won. The struggle for human rights is not a commodity to be bought and sold. While we celebrate Human Rights Day, many voices are still being silenced. The celebration of human rights shouldn't obscure the fact that suppression of dissent and activism continues to persist in South Africa. Let's delve into the untold stories of many brave individuals who dare to voice their opinions against injustices, only to be met with harsh crackdowns. Their voices echo in the streets, in the media, and in the courts, demanding justice, equality, and freedom. But all too often, these voices are stifled, their pleas ignored, their protests quashed. They are the living reminders that the fight for human rights is still very much alive, that the struggle continues, that the dream of equal rights for all is not yet fully realized. These are the voices we must listen to, the voices we must amplify, because let's not forget, the fight for human rights is not over until all voices are heard. Human Rights Day in South Africa is a reminder of unfinished business. The struggle for equality and justice continues to be a steep climb, where the peak is often shrouded in the fog of socio-political complexities. Take land reform, for instance. It's a contentious issue that reaches back into the roots of apartheid, yet remains a critical factor in the country's ongoing economic disparities. The promise of land redistribution remains largely unfulfilled, and the majority of South Africans still wait for this right to materialize. Inequality, too, continues to be a stark reality in South Africa. Despite the strides made since the end of apartheid, the wealth gap remains wide and unbridged. Systemic corruption further exacerbates these disparities, hindering progress and creating an environment where the rich get richer and the poor stay poor. As we celebrate Human Rights Day, let's remember that the fight for justice is far from over.